Every man has his heroes, and every life is made up of stories. Heroic Stories is a series from heroicmen.org to find out why some men choose the harder path in life, even when it means losing everything, how they survived, and who they are today. These men seem heroic to us, even if they don't call themselves that. They seem to have an extra strength in their system, extra grit to battle doubt and find purpose. All of these men are seeking divine friendship with God, and they all believe in building up faith, building up men, and building up our future. Sponsored by CatholicSpeakers.com and hosted by Dominic from Heroic Men, get the mindsets, the scars, and the playbooks that these men have earned the hard way. Heroism isn't born, it's made, and these are their stories. Hi friends, and welcome to the Heroic Stories show. I'm Dominic from Heroic Men, and I'm fortunate to be joined by Tom Pazili. It's good to have you, Tom. Welcome.
A privilege to be with you. Thank you so much, Dominic.
I think it's going to be a good conversation. It's a little less formal than your whole big studio. It's a little more friendly, which is perfect for this kind of conversation because I want to I would like to meet you and then also introduce you to our audience, to the men who follow along this show. We'd like to try to meet the men behind all of the adventures, behind the headlines and the mask and the epic work that you do, a heroic work that you do. So here's the first question that I put to everybody. What is a story of heroism that absolutely lights you up?
Oh boy. And when you watch television and you read the news and you doom scroll through social media, you probably think that everything is going to heck and that, we don't have heroes anymore in this world. And that is totally not true. One of the things that I do on my show every week is I have a Patriot of the Week, and I find somebody who has just gone above and beyond. I find someone who is just making the country proud because they're helping somebody, and so there are tons of these stories of heroism. I oftentimes look to our police officers, and there isn't one particular instance necessarily that I can point to, but I do encourage people to keep really proper perspective, because there are so many extraordinary people, young and old, folks who wear uniforms, folks who don't wear uniforms, who just are willing to give of themselves to help their fellow men and women. And they are the unsung heroes of this country and this world. So, every time I pick up the paper and I see a cop who, saves somebody's life, or I see a good Samaritan who's under no legal obligation to help anybody. They could just pick up the phone and they could call 911, or they can do what we've seen so many times. Unfortunately, people they get their phone, they get their camera, and they're watching some horrific thing happen, and they're just videotaping it for social media. Every time I see one of those people step in to save a life, or to calm a circumstance, or to jump into action where they know that they're putting themselves at risk, and they happen in every community, in every state, from coast to coast. Those are the people that, they give me a tremendous amount of inspiration, because, working in the news industry and the news business, it's chaos profiteering for, in so many ways. You go through social media, you read what's happening online, you look at what is driving clickbait today, and it's all negative. I mean, there's a reason why we have a mental health crisis in this country. There's a reason why people are as depressed as they are. And not only have they distanced themselves from God and from their faith, but they're also getting a steady diet of doom and gloom and chaos and the worst of humanity. So it's very important for people to realize that the best of humanity is still among us, and to really keep that proper perspective. So I tend to look at our military and our first responders, but also just regular people doing extraordinary things.
Amazing. I like that line you led with where you said, we look around and we might think that there are no more heroes, and we couldn't be more wrong. I've got to ask, just to press that point, is there one example of a first responder stepping up and doing something that immediately comes to your mind as an example of this kind of a story that inspires you?
I have a really good friend of mine who was a police officer. He was actually a fraternity brother of mine when I was in college. So we've been buddies for a very, very long time. And I get very inspired by him because he was a police officer for 20 years and he saw the mental and emotional toll that being a first responder and dealing with trauma, the toll that that takes on the average police officer. And
Mhm.
he has now, in his retirement, he went back to school and he became the first police officer to get a degree in applied positive psychology in the country. Nobody had ever done it before. And so what he's doing is now
Applied
dedicating his life.
positive psychology? Can you explain
Applied
that?
positive psychology. And it's a strategy for helping people deal with trauma to avoid suicides and to do
Wow.
something about the number of law enforcement and first responders who are committing suicide every single year. And it's a significant challenge here and around the world. And he's now dedicated his life to trying to save those lives. And
Wow.
so when I think of somebody who's in that law enforcement community who has stepped in a very unusual way. I often think of him, and I might sound like a cop out because he's literally one of my closest friends, but I do get inspired by the fact that he is so passionate to save these lives
Mhm.
and coming up with new methods and new curriculum and new ways to these men and women to talk about their trauma and to therefore then deal with it in a way that ultimately they may not realize it, but ultimately could save their life and
Mhm.
help prolong their lives.
I understand that he's not the focus of this show, but I love it when people share stories like this because then I want to understand from your point of view, why do you think he is the kind of man that he is, making these kinds of decisions?
Because he's been there,
Yeah.
I think that he made that choice because he's had several people close to him um, commit suicide, decide to end their lives because the
Okay.
trauma was so significant.
Mhm.
And 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 he decided that he wanted to do something about it. I mean, he could do anything, with his life, but he's very mission focused. And
Mhm.
I always encourage people to surround themselves with folks who are mission focused. And I don't think it doesn't really matter what the mission is as long as it's for good, but be mission focused. Have a ministry in life. That could be this is your ministry, Dominic, right? So have a ministry. And that's very difficult to do in today's day and age with all of the pressures of modern society. But he's decided that he's going to do that, and he's already having an impact on his community.
For you, why do you say that? Surround yourself with mission-focused people. Why is that important?
Because we need to be we're not here to serve ourselves. And that was part of Christ's message, was that we're here and we're called to be bigger than person, to be bigger than who we are, and to dedicate ourselves to the service of God and his creation. And and like I said, there are a lot of different ways to do that. But oftentimes when we're so consumed with the physical, with the corporeal, we're so consumed by our desire to accumulate physical things that we're not attempting to advance a mission that helps sustain God's kingdom here on earth, and therefore prepare ourselves for for eternity and for the next life and the next world, and to bring ourselves closer to Him. And so for a lot of dads out there, it's being a dad, or it's
Mhm.
being the best husband that you can be. That's a great mission. Okay. You don't have to be the president. You don't have to be a senator or a governor. Raising children in the faith is something that is a mission, and it is a
Mhm.
ministry that everybody can kind of call their own. And then, certainly you can do other things as well, but that's a really good place to start, I think, in terms of keeping the service of God and his creation sort of front and center in your life.
Yes, agreed, agreed. Back over to you and your story then. Next question that we ask is, what was one of the most difficult decisions that you yourself ever had to make? And how did you get through it?
Let me see. So I think that there are probably Probably two. The first was the decision to go to Iraq immediately following the war. I had gotten a phone call from the White House, and they had asked me to deploy as a civilian advisor to the coalition government in Baghdad. And they needed to know very quickly. And again, I could have done something much more comfortable than get on a plane and in a space of a few days find myself sitting on my luggage on the military side of a airport in Kuwait in 130-degree heat, awaiting a C-130 to go into Baghdad for some indeterminate amount of time, especially since I had absolutely no military or weapons training and almost no equipment that was useful that was issued by the U.S. government. But after a lot of prayer, there was this there was sense that I was going to be doing something for the greater good. And so I made the determination that was something, that was a way that I could serve my country. And it was, and if you believe in, addressing the freedom deficit, for instance, that leads toward, Islamic terrorism. And we see that in the Middle East, and it's a terrible condition. If you believe that addressing that helps advance religious freedom and also just, liberty around the world, well, then it was something that I felt like it was important to do. The second one is actually something that happened not long ago during COVID. Um, we My wife was an objector to the vaccine. She was a religious objector to the vaccine. The state of New York, where we lived, made religious exemptions illegal. And so she was dispatched unceremoniously from her job at a hospital. She's a physician. And we sat around and she said, "Well, what are we doing?" We were paying an exorbitant amount of taxes to prop up a left-wing government that was increasingly out of step with our values. And so she came to me and she said, "I think it's time for us to move." Now I'm a New Yorker. I never anticipated that I was going to ultimately leave, and that took a lot of prayer, and it took a real leap of faith. If you believe, and I think we should, that everything that happens, the good stuff and the bad stuff, is all part of the great magisterium of God. He's giving it to you, and for some purpose to learn from it.
Mhm.
Then, instead of being annoyed about the situation, you can say, "Okay, well, what am I expected to learn here? And is this an opportunity to do something that you never thought that you would do?" And of course, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan, right? And so it was a lot of thought, a lot of prayer, a lot of discussion, and we decided we would take the leap of faith and we would leave New York for Eastern Tennessee. And it has had been sacrifices and there have been challenges, but overall, we had to trust that if we ended up here, that this is exactly where the Lord wanted us to be. That was hard because I'm the type that I try to control everything. Okay, I'm kind of a control freak, and especially somebody who's got a career where when you're in cable news or you're in politics, it's very intense. It can be 7 days a week, and your brain's constantly moving, right? And so you have to put a show together. You have to determine how you're going to tell a particular story. You want to try to control the narrative to some degree. Well, the narrative of your life you cannot control. So in many respects, it's a contradiction in human nature. And that's
Yeah.
where God comes in, where you have to be willing to say, all right, you know what? I don't know if I have the answer. I'm going to give this over to you, and you're going to do it. You're just going to I'm just going to turn myself over to your divine will, and we're going to go. We're going to hit the gas. Um so that move was very significant for me personally and for my family. I have three children. So it was a really big move, moving three kids and a very well established house and career and everything else 750 miles to someplace I'd never thought I would live.
Amazing. I got so many little questions. One thing I loved was something you said, life is the great magisterium of God. That's such a fascinating look to look at it all. You said, so going back, if we can, to your story about
Yeah.
being deployed or detailed to Iraq. How does a control freak say yes to something I would imagine completely out of your control, and you end up on a tarmac? What kind of a man is able to make a decision like that? Yeah. What was it? What was in you that allowed you to completely give up all sense of control, I would imagine, and take on an adventure that you would have no
Mhm.
guaranteed outcome, life threatening danger, I'm going to assume, being a war zone? Like,
Mm.
what's a little bit more about you?
Well, I'm a very mission focused individual. And, when you get a phone call from the White House and they say this is the best way that you can serve the president of the United States and to serve this cause of freedom that we were attempting to advance and to contribute to the global war on terrorism, as somebody, as a patriot, that should give you some pause to say, okay, maybe I need to do this, right? But I also see very clearly some of the threats because of my time in government to our values and to our way of life, not only as Americans, but also as Christians and Catholics. And so it made sense, as nonsensical as it seemed to be. When I
Mhm.
called up one of my friends, and I was married at the time, called up one of my friends and I said, I'm going to Iraq. And he said, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? You're going to go do that? But it made sense. So that's n- and again, that doesn't happen without understanding that you are tethered to the Almighty. And it is true what they say. I mean, nothing will bring you closer to God than being in the middle of a rocket attack or a mortar attack or having people chase after you with RPGs. And every night before I went to bed, I'd say the prayer to Saint Michael, and um, and uh, and I had some surreal experiences, um, including going to mass in the ballroom of Saddam Hussein's palace, which is where, in his throne room, which is where we would have mass on Sunday, beneath the dome of this grand room where he had painted the horsemen of the apocalypse, and a scene of a modern sort of Nebuchadnezzar coming in and conquering Jerusalem. And he painted an extra horse for himself in the dome of this room. And it was an extraordinary to receive the Eucharist in that setting. Gave
Mhm.
you a tremendous amount of, just buoyed you, right? And just knowing that, Christ is here, even in this room, even in this setting where such evil had presided,
Mhm.
Christ is here in the Eucharist. Just, pretty some pretty amazing stuff. I went off on a tangent. I'm sorry about
No, it's good to say you can't just say surreal stuff and then not pull on that
that.
thread for a second. You mentioned being very mission focused, and you said having to leave New York and all that. In the last couple of months, I watched a movie called Nona's about that one restaurant that's run by the grandmothers and stuff.
I just watched that movie on a plane like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, how cool. So I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for you. That being, I'm assuming, your heritage, your culture, your people, and then to uproot and
Mhm.
leave. I'm sure that's leaving a lot of your identity behind. You just used the word tethered. That sense of we fight for things we love, things that matter. Like
Mhm.
our country, our place, our home, because we're tethered to it, we're part of it. How does a man do that? Leave that much? And I imagine there's a significant personal sacrifice that a lot of men can't do or can't make, and they will find other ways around it. Again, what was it in you that allows you to, I know you've said mission focus. I'm going to be really annoying. I want to press on that and understand
Wh-
more about how you could make a decision like that.
I think you have to come to a realization at some point in your life that maybe things are not properly ordered.
Oh, say more.
And because you talked about a lot of things just now, culture, familiarity, places where your family came from, places that you may love, but all of those things are very physical.
Hmm.
Those are not spiritual things necessarily. But if, when you have an issue where, you know, you have to do something for your family. You have to do something in order to be, for instance, maybe even more effective at being your authentically Catholic self by pulling yourself out of a particular environment. That's a matter of like properly ordering things. Is my comfort because this was familiar? Is is that what should take precedence? Or is it the possibility for a better life for my wife and my children? Is it spiritually encumbered by the fact that by being in this environment, maybe I'm sort of in some way financing or validating ways of life and values that run so incredibly counter to my own, and kind of putting those things in the proper order. I
Mhm.
think that that's how you sort of put the pieces. You put the pieces there, and of course you
Yeah.
stick God on the top, and you say to him, I think I'm hearing that this is what you want me to do.
Mhm.
And just also trusting ultimately that if you feel in your heart something is moving you, you have to be responsive to that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, obedient to the call when it comes, putting God in the right place and letting everything else fall as it needs to after that. I think it's very difficult to do that. We struggle with that. Has that always been something obvious to you? Or was it something that you learned at some point? I imagine, teenage years, young men, early into marriage, like we really struggle with that, you know, a healthy hierarchy like that. Has it always been obvious? Just felt obvious to you?
I think that there were times I lost my dad when I was very young.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
he got sick when I was 8 and he died when I was 10. And if I didn't have my faith, and just like everybody, things ebb and flow in life, and it's more important or less important certain times. But when you have some sort of trauma in your as a child, and
Mhm.
then you have to sort of process it,
Mhm.
ultimately you do come to a realization that, and you have a choice. I mean, God gives us this free will. He gives us this choice that you're going to follow his roadmap for how to heal and then how to cope with things that roadblocks that could be thrown up in your life or not, right? We see a
Mhm.
lot of people today who, um, unfortunately, they're not choosing God.
Mhm.
And so they're trying to find salvation in this very earthly context. And they're trying to cope with life without the roadmap that we were given on how to do it.
Mhm.
And this is one of the reasons why we have a mental health crisis, we have serious identity issues, we have an epidemic of suicides, particularly among young people. And so I it had to get to a point, and I that my faith was important when I was younger, in dealing with the aftermath of that. I knew that there was something there. There was a community there. There was a faith community. There was a parish. There were people that God put into my life to help me get through that. But then I think ultimately, once you get married and you have a family, I think I've become a much stronger Catholic and a stronger disciple, because it just becomes far more apparent that with the pressures of parenting, the pressures of marriage, um, of a career, that yeah, we need this. We need to be able to be in this world, but
Mhm.
not necessarily of the world,
Yep.
in order to truly survive. And so I think I came to that realization probably sometime in my late 20s, maybe. But yeah, that's
Yeah. Well, it's like the stakes are after marriage, especially, or taking on a significant responsibility. The stakes are higher, and we have to think beyond ourselves. So, talking about a roadmap of getting through life, who are your heroes? People that you look to, or people who inspire you?
so I there are a few. I did not get named Thomas by accident, right? And I think that my is my father's middle name. That's how I got the name. But I think that Thomas has helped me pretty dramatically
Oh, really?
at times, and not just one of them. There were a whole bunch of them, right? They're just amazing when you think about Thomas Aquinas or Thomas of Canterbury, but or St. Thomas More. Okay, somebody I've worked in government, and politics, and in media. I've been in public life just like he was. I'm also an
Mhm.
attorney, and when you think about someone who was under enormous pressure to put the church aside for a secular government or a secular demands, the
Mhm.
demands of the world instead of the demands of the church, and who paid with his life because he was not willing to do that. He was not willing to suggest that a man and his desires, his physical desires, was going to compromise his Thomas More's soul. His soul was not going to be compromised. So I oftentimes think about him when I'm in a difficult spot. Thomas the Apostle is, I think, one of the most extraordinary people in the Gospels, because here is the doubter. Here's the guy who said, "You're all crazy. He's dead. It's over. This has been real, folks, but it's over." And then he goes from being the doubter to traveling further than any of the other apostles to spread the word of Christ before he's martyred in India, in what is today India. I just think that there are a lot of us
Mhm.
that could use that example and say, I doubted. I wasn't maybe the best Christian or the best Catholic. There were times, I'm sure a lot of people would say, there were times when I fell away from the church. Oh, but you can not only come back and you can not only reacquaint yourself with Jesus, but you can go further than anybody would ever have thought that you could go in terms of trying to spread the word of Christ and being an example. Okay, I'm not saying that you have to go and be a missionary. Just being an example in your daily life of Christ and the Gospels. And I go back to that roadmap, right? So I think the two of them, and then John Paul II, one of the great leaders of our lifetime. And I had the opportunity to meet him back in 2002 with George W. Bush, and it was one of the most amazing days of my life. But somebody who, and again, I speak as somebody who cares a great deal about this country and our position in the world. Somebody who
Mhm.
understood the importance of America and America's formula for greatness and what America has meant to freedom for people all around the world, and our role as a nation in together with the Catholic Church in trying to end Soviet communism. He understood that, and his impact is still felt. Now we've retreated, I think, from where we were in the early 90s when the Cold War ended, and we see that in the rise of communism and authoritarianism in in a number of places in the world. Um, but his impact was extraordinary on the church. And I'm a big fan of Benedict XVI, but Benedict XVI was a bookworm. He was a very, very, he was a
Sure.
theologian. He was, his writing is beautiful if you read the writing. But John Paul II understood a television society very well, and he
Mhm.
kept his messaging very simple and straightforward. And as a young person, I remember him standing up and saying, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid." If you took nothing away from him,
Mhm.
even that alone is so incredibly profound, right? And then the last person that I would mention is Lincoln. Lincoln understood. I believe that he knew that he would not live to see the end of his term. Um, and he knew the stakes were very, very high. He knew the stakes were very high, and that it was incredibly important to keep this country from tearing itself apart. And in the process, he began a process of addressing the great sin of America, which was slavery. We reap what we sow. It's a basic biblical principle, but it's also important for nations too, not just people.
Mhm.
So beginning that process not only holding the country together, but advancing beyond slavery. And we're still in that process, but advancing beyond it was something that he knew that he needed to do. And the other thing that he is a very good example of is forgiveness. He was not a small man. He put people who were his rivals into his cabinet. He told his generals that when the South surrenders, give people back their sidearms and their horses and send them home. That was a tremendous, that was a tremendous feat that would be a tremendous feat for any man. I mean, can you imagine anyone being so incredibly forgiving and magnanimous today in the
Mhm.
way that he addressed people that had committed some of the greatest atrocity on the country that we have ever experienced. So those are sort of the people that I kind of think about uh, when I need some inspiration.
Amazing. Gosh, what a lineup. Well, then, lastly, who do you dream of being or wish to be a hero for in the sense that you're putting in heroic effort to serve them? And I'll be annoying and say you can't say God and you can't say your family because those are given. So, who are people in this world that you put heroic effort into serving?
People who doubt,
Oh, okay.
people who doubt themselves, people who doubt their country, and people who doubt their God. And there are a lot of them. We live in an environment right now, Dominic, as you know, where trust in institutions is among its lowest levels. Trust in the media is among its lowest levels. Trust in government is at its lowest levels. Trust in the church is at very low levels. And there are good reasons for a lot of those things. Every time that I go on the air, I ask for the strength to reach just one person. Give them greater faith in God, greater faith in their country, and greater faith in themselves. If I do that, if I'm standing in front of a room and I do that, then in some way I've succeeded. And it's not about, yes, would it be great to reach millions of people all the time and to be able to impact lots of folks? Yeah, I would love to do that. I would love for my voice to reach as far as it can reach. But if we can restore faith and trust and hope in this country, and I can play a part in that, I think that would be a good way to serve God and creation.
Thank you. Thank you. So, bonus question. How do you make your
Yeah.
prayer life work? You've got everything going on. Like you said, it's a constant news cycle. It never ends. You're on air, you're going live. What are your practices for staying sane and keeping close to God?
Um, Try to read the Bible before bed at least a couple of nights a week, and it doesn't need to be 15 minutes. Just whatever it is. Make mass a priority. If not during the week, then definitely on Sunday. And then something that I think is pretty sort of say the rosary, and a commitment to the rosary I think is really important. And the rosary is phenomenal because you can say it anywhere. I like when I'm sitting on an airplane and I fly a lot. I say, I'll sitting on the plane, and if I'm restless and I'll say the rosary. But something that I don't think that the church teaches very well is that, yeah, sure, you can go to adoration, and everybody should, but we're all busy. God is there. So your personal relationship is not something that is once a week, and it's not something that's only at night or bed. Your personal relationship can be a prayer or a you know um, that conversation when you're walking down the street in Manhattan. It can be any time, any day. And so I do my best to acknowledge God, to talk to God, and to build that relationship on an ongoing basis, a number of times a day. And a prayer doesn't need to be 5 minutes long. A prayer can even be, just give me strength just to get through this. Just I need to get through this for 5 minutes, right? That can
Yeah.
be a prayer, right?
Mhm,
It's an acknowledgement that there is something greater than you.
mhm.
And so I think that's the way that you fit it in. is it needs to become a real integrated part of your day, and it will become second nature. So when you have those moments, to use those for prayer. And the one thing I'm really bad at, and I think that everybody needs to work on, especially with this and everything that, all the stimuli that we're, bombarded with, is to try to make time for silence. Silence is golden. Silence is when you can listen to yourself and that you can hear the Lord. And you need to try to make time, even if it's 5 minutes where there is literally nothing. It's just you and your thoughts. And that's like a New Year's resolution of mine every single year. And most of the time, it doesn't last very long. That's very hard to do. But 2026 is going to be my year. That's the year that we're going to do more of it. But I think that's important as well. But it becomes part of your day. And I think that it ultimately is very comforting when you can have these little moments where you can talk to God.
Thanks for joining us. If this story connected with you, send it to someone. And if you want to chat with us about anything that we've said, send us a message at heroicmen.org/stories. Our partner at CatholicSpeakers.com has built the easiest way to book powerful Catholic speakers for your men's event. They are the #1 resource worldwide for event organizers and Catholic speakers. Book easily, confidently, and ask for several grants to support ministry to men. Visit heroicmen.org/speakers today. Come and share your journey in the Heroic Brotherhood, our online community for Catholic men like you. Get the app with the best Catholic media for men, including Heroic Men's original series, Be a Man. It's all free, because an alliance of donors already paid it forward for you. Stand with us. Let's build the future of Catholic men. Will you pay it forward? $5 a month pays it forward for 5 men. Visit Heroic Men to stand with us. Because men like us, we leave no man behind. Visit heroicmen.org today.